I should have noticed the signs earlier. My wife, Laura, had been seeing a psychologist, Dr. Harper, for about 6 months. At first, I was relieved that she was getting the help she needed. Laura had been struggling with anxiety and depression, and it seemed like she was finally finding some peace. She came home from her sessions calmer, more relaxed, almost like the woman I married 10 years ago. But then, subtle changes began to creep in. Laura started dressing up for her appointments, something she never used to do. She would spend extra time in front of the mirror, carefully applying makeup and choosing her outfits with a level of care that was new. She insisted on seeing Dr. Harper twice a week, which seemed excessive, but I didn't want to question her need for therapy. One evening, I noticed Laura's phone lighting up with a message while she was in the shower. It was from Dr. Harper. My curiosity got the better of me and I glanced at the screen. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow," the message read, followed by a winking emoji. My heart sank. It was too familiar, too intimate. When Laura came out of the shower, I tried to act normal. "How was your session today?" I asked, my voice steady. "It was good," she replied, avoiding my eyes. "We talked about a lot of things." Her response was vague, and I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I didn't press further, but my mind was racing. I decided I needed to know more about this man who seemed to be taking up so much of my wife's thoughts and time. Over the next few weeks, I paid closer attention to Laura's behavior. She was constantly on her phone, always smiling at messages she wouldn't let me see. She grew more distant, her touches less frequent, her affection almost non-existent. Our conversations became strained, filled with awkward silences where there used to be laughter. One night, as she slept beside me, I quietly took her phone and scrolled through her messages with Dr. Harper. My worst fears were confirmed. Their conversations were filled with flirtation, compliments, and plans to meet outside of their sessions. It was clear that their relationship had crossed professional boundaries, becoming something far more personal. I felt a wave of anger and betrayal wash over me. This was the woman I had promised to love and cherish, the woman who had stood by my side through thick and thin. And now she was slipping away, pulled into the orbit of another man. A man who was supposed to be helping her, not seducing her. My suspicions were no longer just suspicions. They were cold, hard truths, staring back at me from the glowing screen of her phone. I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. It was time to take action, to uncover the full extent of what was happening, and to confront the man who was tearing my marriage apart. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, but I knew I needed to stay calm and think clearly. I began my investigation by gathering evidence of Laura's infidelity with Dr. Harper. I took screenshots of their messages, ensuring I had a solid record of their inappropriate relationship. Each message felt like a dagger to the heart, but I pressed on, determined to get to the bottom of this. I decided to dig deeper into Dr. Harper's professional life. I wanted to know if this behavior was a pattern or if Laura was an isolated case. It was time to find out if Dr. Harper had a history of seducing his female clients. I started by visiting his office under the guise of a prospective client. I wanted to observe him, see how he interacted with other clients, and maybe even find someone who had been through a similar experience. During my visit, I noticed several women in the waiting room, each looking equally uneasy and eager to see Dr. Harper. I struck up casual conversations with a few of them, carefully probing without revealing my true intentions. One woman, Emma, seemed particularly distressed. She mentioned how Dr. Harper had been very hands-on in their sessions, often crossing boundaries that made her uncomfortable. That was the break I needed. I asked Emma if she would be willing to talk more about her experiences outside the office. She hesitated, but eventually agreed to meet me for coffee. Over the next few days, Emma and I met several times. She shared her story, and it became clear that Dr. Harper had been manipulating and seducing his vulnerable clients for years. Emma even introduced me to two other women who had similar experiences. I now had enough evidence to expose Dr. Harper for the predator he was. With Emma and the other women's consent, I recorded their testimonies and collected as much documentation as possible. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. This was about stopping a man who had been exploiting his position to take advantage of those he was supposed to help. Next, I approached a lawyer who specialized in cases against unethical professionals. I presented all the evidence I had gathered, and we discussed the best way to proceed. My lawyer advised me to file a formal complaint with the licensing board and to be prepared for a lengthy battle. But I was ready. I wanted to see Dr. Harper's career ruined, and I wanted Laura to see the kind of man she had been involved with. As the days went by, I continued to act normally at home, even though it tore me apart inside. Laura seemed oblivious to my knowledge, still sneaking around and messaging Dr. Harper. I felt like a stranger in my own home, but I knew the confrontation was coming. I just needed to ensure everything was in place. Finally, the day came when I felt ready to expose everything. I had scheduled a family gathering, inviting close friends and relatives over for a dinner party. Laura was excited, thinking it was just a normal social event. Little did she know that it would be the day her secrets would come crashing down around her. As everyone gathered in our living room, I stood up to make a toast. I looked around at the faces of our loved ones, then directly at Laura. "I have something important to share," I began, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "It's about Laura and her psychologist, Dr. Harper." The room fell silent, and Laura's face turned pale. I continued, revealing the affair and presenting the evidence I had gathered. I also shared the testimonies of the other women, making it clear that this was more than just a personal betrayal. This was about justice. Laura burst into tears trying to defend herself, but the damage was done. Our friends and family were shocked, some expressing disbelief, others offering support. I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. It was time to move on, to rebuild my life without the lies and deceit. The fallout from the confrontation was immediate and intense. Laura was in shock, her tearful apologies and explanations falling on deaf ears. I felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and a strange sense of liberation. It was time to take the next steps. The very next day, I filed for divorce. I made sure our lawyer included all the evidence of her affair with Dr. Harper, strengthening my case. Laura begged me to reconsider, but my decision was final. I couldn't continue living a lie, and I certainly couldn't stay married to someone who had betrayed me so deeply. Meanwhile, the complaint against Dr. Harper gained traction. The licensing board launched an investigation, and I provided them with all the evidence I had gathered. Emma and the other women also came forward, adding their voices to the growing case against him. It wasn't long before Dr. Harper's unethical practices were exposed to the world. News of the scandal spread quickly. Dr. Harper's reputation was shattered, his career in ruins. He faced multiple lawsuits from his former clients, and his practice was shut down. I felt a sense of justice knowing that he could no longer harm anyone else. Laura moved out, and our divorce proceedings began. It was a painful process, but also a necessary one. I leaned on my friends and family for support, finding strength in their encouragement. I focused on rebuilding my life, piece by piece. As the months passed, I found a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. The divorce was finalized, and I moved into a new apartment, starting fresh. It was strange at first, living alone, but it also felt liberating. I began to rediscover myself, pursuing hobbies and interests that I had neglected for years. One evening, while attending a support group for people who had experienced infidelity, I met Sarah. She had been through a similar experience, and we connected instantly. Our shared pain and understanding formed the basis of a deep friendship, which gradually blossomed into something more. Sarah was kind, empathetic, and strong. She understood my struggles and fears, and she helped me see that it was possible to trust and love again. We took things slowly, allowing our relationship to develop naturally. Looking back, I realized how far I had come. The betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been a turning point. I had stood up for myself, sought justice, and ultimately found a path to healing. Life had thrown me a curveball, but I had emerged stronger and more resilient. With Sarah by my side, I felt hopeful about the future. We planned new adventures together, looking forward to the possibilities ahead. The pain of the past had faded, replaced by a sense of optimism and joy. In the end, I learned that betrayal doesn't have to define you. It's how you respond, how you pick yourself up and move forward, that truly matters. I had found my new beginning, and I was ready to embrace it with open arms.